First off, let me say this will not exactly be a video about what D&D did wrong. Instead, this will be what I personally wanted to see from Game of Thrones. And it just so happens that I would have done almost everything differently. Fuck! So we'll keep episode 1 and 2 because fuck it. It was decent enough build up and I enjoyed the tension between the characters. Now on to the meat and veg, episode 3, the Battle of Winterfell. Let me paint you a word picture and accompany my words with dogshit drawings. The Night King has passed the wall and starts making his way south. He flies in the back of his dead dragon with his 100,000 strong army of the dead marching below him. The beginning of episode 3 should take place the previous day. As soon as Tormund and Ed return, Jon dispatches the advanced forces of Dothraki, led by Brienne and Ser Jorah. We then cut to a camera panning out over the north as Drogon and Rhaegal fly past carrying Dany. Dany had gone out ahead with both dragons and begun setting fire to the entire forest, working her way north, igniting everything with dragon fire. The Dothraki down below use these fires as a guide, as the dragons have scouted out the undead horde. The Dothraki split into 2 equal forces, each led by a hero. Once they come upon the undead, the horsemen create a double envelopment of the Night King's army. The 2 dragons fly low, but not low enough to be in range of Walker spears or to be involved in the battle. Instead, they pose a threat to the Night King and his single dragon. Keeping the Night King out of the skirmishing going on down below is important to keep the mobility edge on the side of the Dothraki. Mounted forces will strike and fall back, cycle charging the exposed flanks and prompting the enemy to break their southern march toward Winterfell and instead fracture in an attempt to chase the cavalry. The Dothraki would have had their weapons ignited by the Red Woman before leaving, as they are among the most veteran troops the living possess in this struggle, so needless to say, they need effective weapons. These distraction methods prove effective at buying time for the living. Dany signals a general retreat in the early morning, simply flying over the field, shooting fire into the air. Not all forces are in a position to head directly to Winterfell, but now they know to make their way there. Back at Winterfell, a series of fortifications had been prepared. Just inside of the burnt tree line lies a large wooden barrier made of cut and stacked trees, a messy pile that would force the undead to slow down and climb, not allowing a direct charge across an open field. This tree pile would also serve as a burn line awaiting ignition by dragonfire. Just inside this tree line would be a line of dragon glass spike barriers. 500 feet inside this first line would be the second, a trench 10 feet wide and 10 feet deep. On the Winterfell side of the trench would be dragon glass spikes, with unsullied phalanxes behind them, led by Grey Worm. Behind the unsullied is a division of archers led by Davos, and behind them the catapults and trebuchets. This trench would extend directly from the far left and right walls of the city. Inside of this line would be the final defense. Dragon glass spike barriers would be arranged into 3 V shapes leading to the main gate. These shapes would create a funnel that could easily be held by unsullied phalanx. The wildlings and northern soldiers will stay in the city and hold the walls and reinforce where is needed. Dany and her dragons return quickly and land on the northern wall of Winterfell, awaiting the undead. Bran is down in the God's Wood. He looks to the heroes running around and says under his breath to buy him as much time as they can. Then his eyes roll back. In the light of the day, the living can see their enemies approach and hear the stampede of literal death cascading through the burnt forest toward them. The dead emerge and hit the tree pile at full speed. Like ants flowing up and over the wall, they begin crashing down on the other side. Many die as they fall directly onto the dragon glass spikes. The shattered dead begin to pile up, and whites start pouring over the tree pile and into the gap. Behind the trench, Grey Worm shouts to his fearless soldiers, "Valu Muguris," and they reply with a single resounding thud of spears on shields. The initial whites that get to the trench fall in and run to the other side, where a dragon glass spear is waiting for them. The flow of whites increases. In a few areas, the tree pile is broken by an undead giant or mammoth. A few white wolves and bears leap across the trench and shatter against the dragon glass barrier. The trench begins to fill and some unsullied fall as a giant steps across and swipes aside the barrier and spearmen in front of him. An unsullied spear soars through the air and plunges through the throat of the giant, killing him. At this point, the archers are firing at will into the swirling mass of undead inside the first line. After a while, the whites have filled the trench and are hacking the spike barriers to bits. The Unsullied are in a pitched battle now. Grey Worm gives a signal to Davos, who then orders the artillery to fall back into the city. The archers are running low on arrows and are instructed to fall back to the city walls as well. As the Unsullied start getting pushed back, the Knights of the Vale charge out from behind Winterfell. With dragon glass lances and dragon glass studded armor on their horses, they smash into the western flank of the Whites in the gap between the lines. At this moment, Drogon and Rhaegal fly out and ignite the burn pile, cutting off reinforcements to the trapped Whites, as the afternoon sun begins descending in the sky. Jon is at this time on the wall commanding the armies. He receives a message from a runner that more and more Dothraki are returning and gathering south of the city. He acknowledges the information and goes back to the battle. Now the pair of dragons are sweeping through the enemy's eastern flank, strafing Whites with fire as they fly. Then the Night King attacks. In a dive, the undead dragon comes straight for Rhaegal. Noticing at the last moment, Rhaegal rolls in midair and the dragons go chest to chest. Being so low to the ground, the pair tumble and hit the frozen earth, biting and clawing as they come to a rolling stop. Drogon immediately pursues without needing orders from Dany, and as his two brothers come to a rolling stop, he covers the whole area around Viserion and Rhaegal with a torrent of flames, instantly killing all the Whites around them. Rhaegal is quick to take to the air, and the pair of living dragons gain some distance from the Night King and their undead brother. The Night King knows the living will not risk losing another dragon to a White Walker spear, so he is relatively safe surrounded by his army on the ground. Dany gets back to the wall and catches up with Jon and checks Rhaegal's wounds. Jon is staring out over the wall at the Vale Knights. He can see they are crumbling under the enemy threat. Out on the battlefield, both men and horse are crushed and scattered by a wedge of undead giants, a directed counterattack by the Night King. The giants wade through the knights, swinging tree trunks. Lances break against their giant bones and patchwork armor. The fat Lord of the Vale leads his personal guard against the giants and manages to kill one before being smashed. The Vale Knights break and fall back, riding as fast as they can to regroup behind Winterfell. The Night King on his dragon takes off and flies into the air. Dany and Jon watch from the walls of Winterfell, deciding not to take the bait. The Unsullied begin to fall back to the final defensive line as the trench is filled and the dead run unhindered across. Dead Whites begin to pile high before the Unsullied phalanx before the front gate. Davos stands with the archers on the wall and commands both them and the artillery in the courtyard, which never stop firing. Many heroes gather in the courtyard, readying themselves for close combat, being led by Jon. Dany mounts Drogon, who is uninjured, and takes flight to begin burning the dead fighting with the Unsullied outside, while Rhaegal stands inside the wall but towering over the edge. He breathes fire onto the swarm of Whites now up against the walls of Winterfell. Suddenly the Night King swoops down, and his dragon breathes his ice breath along the wall. Sir Davos and his archers are killed instantly, and the gate behind the Unsullied explodes. Drogon banks sharply to intercept the Night King. They are able to cut off the ice dragon, and they collide for a moment in midair. Hovering over the western wall of Winterfell, the dragons bite and claw at each other. The Night King winds back, ready to throw another ice spear at the opposing dragon, when Rhaegal's fire sends him flying. Drogon's living brother strikes Viserion at full speed from the side. Viserion's right wing was burnt badly by the fire attack, and the strike from Rhaegal knocked the dragon to the ground. Crashing into the western wall and destroying a large part of it, the two dragons fight desperately. Rhaegal bites down hard on the neck of the ice dragon and will not let go. With white eyes like milk, Rhaegal thrashes violently and takes a deep breath in. With his dead brother's neck still in his mouth, Rhaegal breathes fire and incinerates the head and neck of Viserion. The ice dragon falls defeated to the snow-covered ground. Rhaegal is too injured to fly now, so stands his ground against the swarm of undead who have wrapped around the sides of the city and now launched themselves at the dragon. Drogon perches on top of the wall behind his brother, breathing fire at the enemy. The evening has come and Whites appear from the darkness all around the city. A battle cry is heard, and Ser Jorah, with about 100 Dothraki at his back, as well as the remaining Knights of the Vale, heroically charge into the flank of the undead attacking Rhaegal. Ser Jorah is knocked from his horse as he rides toward the dragon. Noticing the hero, Rhaegal takes a step in his direction. A White Walker comes from the darkness, and Jorah desperately defends himself with Samwell's family sword of Valyrian steel. But the sword is knocked from Jorah's hand, and the walker kicks him in the chest. As he winds back to deliver the death blow, a leathery wing drops down in front of the walker, and a gaping maw of fire confronts him from above. At point-blank range, the walker is destroyed utterly by dragon fire. Ser Jorah gets back to his feet and retrieves his sword. He fights at the feet of the dragon. Striking out in all directions, the pair struggle desperately, as the dead pile up and swarm over them, burying both Jorah and Rhaegal. Dany tears herself from the loss and turns to the front gate. The Unsullied have been pushed back to defending the breach in the wall. She knows the Night King is around, and so are his White Walkers. She needs to keep moving to make herself a difficult target. At the front gate, Jon notices the western wall fall and commands Tormund, the Hound, and Podrick to cover the gap with a few dozen wildlings and Northmen. A white mammoth hits the Unsullied at full speed. Grey Worm and his companions stand their ground, forcing the mammoth to impale itself on dragonglass spears. With its weight and momentum, it crashed through the line, trampling Unsullied, and hits Grey Worm with its tusk, shattering bones and sending him flying into the courtyard to land hard on the stone. White Walkers enter the gap through both the west and north openings. Tormund, the Hound, and Podrick square up against 5 White Walkers, while 7 more enter through the north. Ed, Beric, and Theon are the first to confront those that came from the main gate. Ed manages to kill his walker with a sword trick Jon taught him in training years ago. Beric struggles to get a killing blow on his walker, but Lyanna Mormont comes in from the side with a spear rush, forcing the walker to defend a new threat while Beric destroys him with his flaming sword. Theon gets the upper hand against his walker, but a second joins the battle, cutting off Theon's weapon arm while the first walker takes off Theon's head. Whites pour in around the walkers. Beric grabs Lyanna Mormont, putting her behind him as the pair are swarmed. Jon, Samwell, and Jaime try desperately to get to Beric, but they cannot as they are confronted by walkers. Jon fights well, but must constantly defend himself against whites, as well as the walker. Samwell is stabbed in the side by a white, then in the back by another. Not as skilled as Jon, they surround him and cut him to pieces. Jon screams in fury, killing the white he is fighting and making his way to the one who killed Sam, but Jaime gets there first, stabbing the walker through the back with his sword before being overwhelmed by whites from all directions. Before the end, he resorts to clubbing whites with his metal hand as they drag him to the ground to die next to Samwell. Jon can see Beric's flaming sword swinging not far away and hears Lyanna Mormont's screams of battle. He sees Ed, who has climbed onto some rubble by the wall breach, slashing desperately at whites all around him. Jon looks up to see the whites begin flowing up and over the walls of the city. All along the length of the northern wall, the living fight the dead. A walker slashes one of Ed's legs and he falls back and crawls along the stones behind him. The walker jumps up upon the stone Ed was on to follow him, but a dragonglass spear soars through the air, impaling the walker. Jon follows the trail and sees a bloody and broken Grey Worm, who has been standing and waiting for an opening at a White Walker. With his last effort, he threw that spear, then falls to the ground dead. In the western gap, the smaller hole is easily plugged with warm bodies. Podrick confronts a White Walker and is knocked to the ground and stabbed through the chest. The Hound overpowers his White Walker, cutting him down with a dragonglass axe. While Tormund takes the vanguard. Right in the middle of the wall breach, with a weapon in each hand, he swings wildly left to right, trying to stem the flow of whites into the castle. A Walker ice spear appears from the darkness and impales Tormund through the chest. He is thrown back against the rubble. Unfazed, he strikes the ice spear with one of his dragonglass weapons, shattering it, and gets back up to continue fighting. As he chops at whites, 2 walkers step into the breach and cut down the Northmen and wildlings defending it. They charge at Tormund, and he countercharges. He throws the weapon in his left hand at one walker, then dives toward the other. His thrown weapon is deflected, while his leaping attack is more effective. He overwhelms the walker with a series of fast attacks, eventually chopping into its shoulder, killing it. The second walker comes in from behind but is tackled by Ghost. The direwolf wrenches the weapon from the walker's hand and bites at his face. A kick sends the wolf flying. But before he can stand up, the Hound delivers a brutal downward axe chop, splitting the walker's sternum. A glance in Tormund's direction, and the Hound knows he is dead. Down on one knee with eyes open and teeth clenched, Tormund died with his hands still wrapped around the axe that he killed the walker with. The Hound sounds a general retreat. "Fall back to the courtyard!" During all of this, Dany is strafing the grounds outside the wall with fire from Drogon. The Hound, Ghost, and a few surviving men run back to the courtyard where a defensive line in front of the God's Wood entrance has been made. Ghost runs right past the line and begins killing whites who have gotten over the wall and threaten Bran. Jon sees that the area where Ed was had been overrun by whites. The screams of Lady Mormont have gone silent and there is no longer any flaming sword in the distance. Melisandre stands in the God's Wood by Bran, chanting. She stretches out her arms and ignites all the trees in the God's Wood except for the weirwood tree. These flames are intense, unnaturally so, more than just burning lumber is capable of. Whites falling from the walls are consumed by the flames. Ghost stands next to Bran and begins howling with desperation in his voice. The advance of the dead becomes less reckless and the battle seems to slow. Jon reassures his men as he stands at the entrance to the God's Wood. Next to him is the Hound, and into the woodlands Drogon and Dany, both immune to the inferno the surrounding trees had become. Dany informs Jon that there are merely thousands left, and most of the dead have been killed. Jon and the Hound quickly discuss how many whites they saw fall, and there must not be many left. They imagine the Night King will enter the battle soon, leading the remaining whites to overpower the gods with defenses. They agree the dragon should take off and take Dany. They are too big of a target on the ground. Suddenly a deathly cry is heard. The Night King screams to his troops. All the dead immediately stop their attack and turn and begin retreating. Jon cannot believe it. As he turns to Dany, she is already mounting Drogon and taking off. As Dany climbs, she learns the truth. Out of the forest to the west of the castle, hundreds of wolves and direwolves emerge from the trees, running towards Stark Castle. A particularly large white wolf at the head of the pack runs with a desperation behind her milk-white eyes. The white direwolf howls as she runs. Deep in the castle, Arya has been using the dark corridors and hallways to slaughter whites who threaten the crypts. But even within the castle, she hears the howl and knows her friend Lymeria has returned. The super pack falls over Winterfell, ripping apart fleeing whites while Dany strafes as many as she can. The Battle of Winterfell ends, but no one will celebrate this victory. No rest comes as the remaining living spend the rest of the night tending to the injured and piling and burning the dead. As the night goes on, more Dothraki make it back to Winterfell, including one large contingent led by Brienne of Tarth, who had been out all night skirmishing with wandering whites. Knowing that it was unlikely she and her cavalry could re-enter the besieged city, she figured she could stay away and do more good. The episode winds down as the survivors gather what they can and retreat deeper into the castle to rest and ready themselves for any possible second attacks. End.